we are going to, like I say, have 3 dynamic panelists. So what I'm going to do with them is do this. I am going to I can't do that. So anyway, what I wanted to do was try to make it so they were highlighted on the screen. It's not gonna work. Oh, allow multiple pens. Hey, Greg.
Oh, that's
okay. So what I want to do is I want to introduce the 3 individuals to you. Let you know a little something about them. So first of all, we have George Jackson. And George serves as the executive director for APEB, where he first started as a volunteer and worked his way up the ladder to now lead the organization. He is an iconic member of the house ball community, and he has been a frequent presenter nationally and internationally at many of the largest annual HIV prevention conferences, most notably AIDS 2020, USCA, and the Biomedical Summit. George's dedication to community service is fueled by his personal experiences of disenfranchisement and discrimination. Welcome, George. Wave that hand so people know who you are. There you go, shaky hand. Absolutely. And Ms. Janelle Luster is an award-winning Bay Area community organizer and transgender activist. And throughout her career, she has advocated for the rights of the transgender community, people living with HIV, and sex workers, both locally and nationally. She has served as program associate and director of community engagement for the Transgender District, a legally recognized cultural district in San Francisco that aims to stabilize and empower transgender people. She strives to ensure the advancement of transgender people of color, specifically Black trans women and trans men. Welcome, Ms. Janelle. And Shawn Demmons is a queer African-American trans man committed to social and racial justice. He currently works for the UCSF Center for AIDS Prevention Studies, where he provides capacity building and technical assistance services for leaders of AIDS service organizations in regions of the country most impacted by HIV. He has an undergraduate degree in Black Studies and a master in public health from San Francisco State University. So everybody, just welcome our panelists. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the discussion that we're gonna have. So one of the things that I am hoping that we can do is that you all represent not only the LGBT community as a part of it, but you also work with the LGBT community. So in answering, or when we have the discussion, it might be from the perspective of those that you work with, and it also might be your own lived experience, because being a part of the community, we also experience medical mistrust, like those that we work with, which may help to really kind of emphasize our understanding of what folks are going through, because we've experienced it ourselves. Sound good? Sound right? Okay, I'm seeing those nodding heads. Okay, so this is a call and response. So I'm just going to ask any of you. So how do you think medical mistrust shows up in the LGBT community?
Hi, I can go first. Hi, I'm Janelle, pronoun she, her. I think medical mistrust shows up in our community, specifically for trans women, because of biases. And so going to the doctor, going to the clinics, people judging you before they even know what's going on. So I think it starts there with people's biases.
Okay, so for trans women, for biases, okay. And how about for others? How about for you, George and or Shawn? How do you think it shows up for LGBT communities?
I can just jump in real quick and add to what Janelle said. She's spot on as far as I know. mistrust begins with transphobia. It begins with before you even show up at the clinic or the therapist's office. It's all about how people are, how you perceive you will be received when you show up. And that can be based on your past experience. That can be based on the experience of others, because just hearing it, we experience vicarious trauma going into medical settings, hearing about other folks' experiences. And then, of course, our own. And, and then when you couple that with intersecting identities, such as being a Black person, Indigenous person, or other people of color, then you have those things that are going to impact how safe you feel in a medical environment and going in to seek care.
Thank you. And George, you look like you're getting ready on mic. Go ahead.
Yeah. So echoing what both of them said, I feel like bias is a huge part of it, but also just people's thoughts around behaviors. I remember a time when I went to go get on PrEP, and the doctor tried to talk me out of getting on PrEP because of the things that I was doing. And I'm like, all the things that I'm doing are indicative of why I should be on PrEP. And so you trying to talk me out of being on PrEP is going to make me a statistic. And so I think, just people's fear, I guess, personal fear. And this was a gay guy who I'm talking about, but I think his personal fear was that if he gave me PrEP, that he was somehow giving me a license to have condomless sex. And I'm like, all of us on this call we're all products of condomless sex. So, there's some beauty in condomless sex. And so I just, I felt like I shouldn't have to argue to get a medicine that's going to help protect me. And so, yeah, I believe behaviors also have a lot to do with race. And then people's cultural competency, right? Like if you're coming in as a person of trans experience and you're being misgendered or being called by pronouns that don't fit your identity, that's traumatizing as well. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of bias in medical settings.
And you know what? And Duran, I want to take it just a step further, but beyond biases, it's also about actual assaults, actual harm happening. In addition to misgendering is a violent act against trans people, but also we know that according to the Trans Health Survey data put out in 2015, that 33% of trans folks that sought healthcare reported experiencing discrimination and or abuse in those settings. And how that shows up for trans people is oftentimes if we go in, we're used as guinea pigs. It's particularly my trans sisters go into a medical appointment, they have a cold, the next thing you know, they're being asked about what genitalia they have and can they see their body parts, all of these very invasive type questions. And similarly with trans men, we have to learn when we're especially around sexual health assessments, learning a language that is going to create safety for trans people in coming into medical settings. I just think that's important to note. It's not just about the transphobia, the discrimination, the ill-prepared staff to treat you. It's also about actually experiencing violence, being attacked, being assaulted physically in healthcare settings, which is shocking when I first learned that.
Yeah, that's shocking to hear too, Shawn. And how do you learn that language? How is that something taught from, within the community to make sure that if some stuff like that happens, that violence happens, that you can respond to it? I'm thinking about yesterday in the video when Lashrae was talking about being misgendered and knowing that the doctors knew that she was a woman of trans experience, but also her having conversations with her other trans sisters were ways in which that information got disseminated. And I'm just wondering, I think sometimes that's like, even within the African-American community, there's this whole thing of, if I were to say, what happens in this house, shaking head stays in this house. Mm-hmm. And I think also how information is sometimes shared positively and adversely, sometimes stays within kind of I don't want to say a bubble, but within a wall. And I think that, when you were saying, creating that language, I'm just wondering if that language is not happening from the provider, how do we make sure that that language is happening within our communities to provide a shield against that physical assault?
Can I just jump in there? I think like when we have these experiencing violence, like in the moment, you're thinking like, is this just something that comes along with this? So like I had an experience of going to electrolysis and getting electrolysis downstairs, right? And this person, I'm talking to this lady and letting her know, like, I don't call my private parts a dick, and I use this language, and like I want to sit here and not really talk about it. But then she disregarded all that. She still was talking. She called my private parts a shaft. She said dick. She asked me when did I get my balls cut off? And it was just like, I'm sitting there crying, getting electrolysis, knowing that I need this for this surgery to happen. And then I leave there and it's like, do I talk to my sisters about that? Like, is this something that I just hold with myself? Because even in talking about it is re-traumatizing. And so I don't even think all the times that the medical providers even know that they're like putting are harming us in these ways. They just feel like they're doing their job, and they're just going about it until there's a complaint.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, how do we get to the point of not having to get to the point of having to do a complaint? And it's also those things like, why is it oftentimes the responsibility of the LGBTQ plus community to educate? I think that's kind of a weight on our shoulders as an African-American gay man, and oftentimes having to explain, stuff. Somebody asked me, me and my partner, which one was the woman, and I was like, there's just no words. And I would imagine, folks of trans experience, Janelle, like you were saying, the trauma of having to endure electrolysis for the next, confirmation surgery, and then having someone disrespect you in a way that is traumatizing in that moment, and needing to go through it in that moment. Because what can we do? What can we do? So how do you all in your working with individuals and hearing about medical mistrust that they have experienced, what would you say?
I advocate, and I advocate for folks. I've done worked in providing direct services in my career, of course, and I do recall one story. There was a trans woman, I won't name the institution, but it was right here in the Bay Area, went in because one of her breasts needed to be redone. The bag had been ruptured, so she needed to have that done over. And this provider refused her service, and treated her really poorly in the waiting room, in the exam room. And my colleague, it wasn't my client on this particular one, but I gave advice on how to advocate for that person. And they had to advocate and take it all the way up the chain. They tried to refuse her service, and ultimately she was able to receive her care. And I think that it's something hard. And to Janelle's point, it's hard when you go through that and you've been traumatized to then go back and want to file this complaint and then go through this. But I can say I'm the complaint king. And if you disrespect me in a medical care setting, it's not even about so much the outcome. So, because I don't expect anything, because I understand how these systems work and who's running them, but it's my role, my job to advocate for myself. And so I will file a formal complaint, and I will follow it through to the end till I get your raggedy little letter telling me all you're going to do is tell me that you're sorry about it. But it has gone up through all of those levels, and who knows, maybe someone sees it and maybe some change does happen. But advocating when you can, I think, is really key to continue to just say, no, I'm resisting that. You will respect my humanity.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying, Shawn, as far as the whole advocating for folks, because I think that a person's lived experience oftentimes or can influence how we can advocate for ourselves, or the fact that we can advocate on behalf of others. And I think one of the things that I also appreciated that not only what you just said, but also what LaShrae said yesterday, and even the wonderful woman, Julie Mixon, in the sense that if you are feeling vulnerable or in a vulnerable position, how do you know in that moment what to do or how to handle that situation? So I'm just wondering, Janelle and or George, to Shawn's point, when you are working with folks within the community and you hear one of those kind of horrible ways in which someone has been disrespected or devalued, or there is some ways in which, you know, they need someone to help advocate for them, how would you, or how have you done that?
I've just shown up. I have a sister who was just in a hospital for something else, and there, you know, you have your preferred name, something as simple as your preferred name and your pronouns, and they are like going the bat with not calling her any of the names that she's telling them. So I just went there. It's easy to advocate for my sisters. It's easy to advocate for my brothers. It's easy to advocate, to show up and to speak up and, you know, do all this stuff that I learned in trainings and that I know for myself. But sometimes in the moment when it's you facing those things, it's a little bit harder. It was harder for me, and it's easy for me to be there for somebody else, and to not allow somebody else to walk over them, because in that moment, it's hard for you to speak up for yourself when you're trying to get those services. I just think it's more so like, how can you really do that for yourself all the time in these spaces?
I want to say that I think it's really shitty that we, as individuals, that we just respond to these things that happen to us and we're like numb to it. We become conditioned and to accept and to just be like, well, this is what it is. This is par for the course, and it's not okay. I have a bunch of kids, but one of my daughters had a surgery about a year ago, and they did her very similar. We're at Kaiser, you know, it's a nice hospital, you know, good insurance, all of that. And I'm hearing them and they're calling her a he. And I'm like, first off, you would have to like literally have looked below her pants or below her waist to even know anything. And so I'm like, you guys violated her by looking at her body, because what she's in here for does not have anything to do with below her waist. And perhaps maybe they looked at a chart, who knows? But I didn't think that was okay. And she was like, so I went to bat for her. I did the advocating thing, but she was like, no, let's just leave it alone and let's just go. And I'm like, no, this is not okay. And we have to call these people out. Like Shawn said, you're not going to do anything but give me a letter that says, you know, I apologize or whatever, but at least you've done your due diligence and you let them know that this is not okay to do to someone else. And if you do it, you run the risk of someone being empowered, someone being educated, someone knowing their rights and filing a grievance on you, because that's what people do. And so I think on the flip side, it's unfortunate that we become conditioned, especially as Black people, to deal with so much trauma and so much just horrible things. And then we call it resilience and say, pat ourselves on the back and say, we're really strong people. But we shouldn't have to be, and we should be able to be treated just like everyone else is. And so, yeah, I think it's just unfortunate that we become so conditioned to accept such deplorable treatment.
Do you think that, you know, I know that, you know, we're talking about LGBTQ plus communities, but we're also, you know, Black folks. And towards something you just shared or just said, I'm wondering, do we carry trauma of being African-American and then also trauma of being part of the LGBTQ plus? Is it kind of a intersectionality of two emerging, converging things? And if so, how do you think that impacts, you know, how we deal with trauma? And you touched on it some, George. I'm just wondering, if you have any additional thoughts, or Shawn and or Janelle.
I was gonna say, like, as far as I lost my train of thought. Somebody else help me out, please.
I'll jump in, George. How can I not be a black man? That's what people don't know. I'm trans when I'm walking down the street, or if the police are pulling me over, they see a black man. And as a black man in America, I have to deal with what white supremacy. We live in a white supremacist structure. There's structural racism, systematic racism. I have to encounter it at work. I have to encounter it at the grocery store. And then I'm also trans. And so when I bring that into a medical setting and I'm advocating for myself, like, for example, when I had to advocate for myself when I was transitioning, when I began my transition, they wanted to tell me how I was going to transition, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I wanted to get a top surgery before I started hormone therapy. That was what I wanted to do. I had done my research and I said, this is how I want to do it. In fact, I was ambivalent about whether or not I was going to go on testosterone, but I definitely knew I wanted a top surgery. And my insurance provider at the time wanted to tell me that, no, I had to, because these people, back to medical distrust, the standards of care put up by WPATH are like gatekeepers in like how you do your medical treatment, right? Like, you have to go to a therapist and get this letter in order to move forward. And then that's like a way that somebody has this power over your life to be who you are. So historically, trans folk that went into the gender centers like Johns Hopkins, they knew and they talked with each other. The girls would talk to each other. When you go in, this is what you got to say so you can get X, Y, and Z. It may not be what's going on with you at all, right? Mm-hmm. But this script. And that's what I had to resist that. I had to say, I've done research. I understand what my rights are. Like I said, I'm a strong self-advocate for myself. And I wrote that insurance carrier back and said, no, I'm resisting this. And this is how I want to do it. And that's how I did it. But it does require that. And it's hard and it's exhausting. Right now I'm exhausted as a black man first. My transness ain't really bothering me too much these days. But this blackness, I'm tired. I'm tired of all of it right now. But yeah, it's a heavy weight. You have two marginalized, oppressed identities working in tandem, against you, so to speak.
I was going to say, and I was just going to add, I got my thought back. I was going to add that sometimes, like, I've seen this recently, it's been illustrated a few times, but I've seen where people, because of their, I don't want to call it fatigue, but because of their internalized perceptions, right? Because they've been traumatized, because they've been stigmatized so much that they'll walk into a space and think, oh my God, people are treating me differently because I'm trans, or people are treating me differently because I'm living with HIV. And sometimes it's not that. Like, sometimes it is our own internalized stuff. But again, these are direct responses to folks, how they make you feel. And I tell people all the time, your feelings are real. Whether or not the other person intended to make you feel that way is a completely different story. But you have to confront those things and confront those feelings. Ask people, hey, what did you mean when you said X, Y, Z? What was the intention behind that statement? And then you can get some clarity around it, and then you can realize, you will be able to understand whether or not it's your own baggage or whether it's someone else's true
intentions.
Yeah, true intentions. And so, but on the flip side, like Shawn said, I have the same thing too. Like, when folks see me, they see a black man. They don't see, even I can be as loud and flamboyantly dressed as I want to be. People are going to give me a compliment and say, oh, you got on nice shoes, or you got on a nice jacket, whatever the case may be. I cannot remember the last time I got called gay, faggot, or anything like that. But when I get pulled over by the cops, I've got a car that gets me pulled over. When I get pulled over by the cops, I start playing The Little Mermaid and songs, Disney songs, and then they leave me alone. I open my mouth, a purse falls out, and they're like, oh, he's not that black guy. But I shouldn't have to do those things, and I should be treated just like anyone else. I'm driving this car because this is my car. It's not because I'm a pimp or because I stole this car from someone or anything like that. And so I think, again, we come in with all of these baggages, but oftentimes it's rightfully placed. And so, yeah, just walking out of your house as a black person in this country is a big deal.
Definitely. I think like going into the clinics and stuff, like for me, showing up as a Black woman, but also as a trans woman, who at times can be visibly trans. Like, yeah, we can talk about being beautiful and pretty and all the shit, but showing up in a space of still being trans and being clocked as trans in the medical setting, and then people coming at you. Like, yeah, sometimes it can be like our own stuff where it's like you feel like people are like trying to clock your tea, but then when they start talking to you, it's like they're saying these things to you, and the reaction that they give you is like, oh, like you're trans or you're gay, like you're used to this kind of stuff already. And so me saying this, I shouldn't offend you. But then when we're at these clinics and stuff with other Black people, because a lot of our people go to these clinics trying to find other Black people to be more comfortable and all that, it's still happening. And so again, for me, it still be a lot of the biases and stuff that happen. Like, yeah, I can have my own thing where it's like, oh, am I being clocked? That's one thing. But then like people like putting extra trauma on me is a lot, where it makes you not want to go back to these clinics. And it makes you not want to go to any of these settings, period.
When you talk about going into these settings, because one of the things that I appreciated that you said, George, around, you know, how we kind of show up in playing Little Mermaid when you get, you know, pulled over. I'm gonna have to try that one, put some little Disney plus music in my car. So even when that happens, but I'm just wondering too, it's like, do we, you know, as LGBTQ, as African-Americans, do you ever feel like you have to minimize yourself in being able to get the services that you want? Shawn, I loved how you were so adamant about the way in which you had done your research and how you purposely chose the direction of your confirmation surgery. And I'm also wondering too, if was there ever a moment, you're the wrong person, because I know you're going to say no, and I appreciate that in the sense that you stood up for yourself and allocated. But I'm just wondering if there are ever those moments when we have to minimize ourselves to get the things that we want, because I think that sometimes we go into that. I consider myself to be one of the nicest people that I know. I'm from Oregon, and I have always been the Black gay kid from Oregon, even when I didn't have terminology for it. But I also know that my Blackness, you know, as friendly, as educated, you know, as accomplished that I think that I am, like you were saying, George, is people see, and Shawn and Janelle, people see my Blackness. So I think that there is a whole conversation about LGBTQ, and this is not to discredit anybody's experience in the LGBTQ plus community. It's valid, it's real. The coincidence is that we happen to be four Black individuals, you know, in this conversation. So it's not to discredit any other experience. But I know that oftentimes, you know, when I go into spaces, it's like my guard is up because I have learned to put my guard up, you know, not only as a Black man, but also as a gay Black man. And I'm also, you know, just very cognizant of how that makes other people react to me. And I think that, you know, when we go into the medical, you know, industry for whatever care that we need, I'm wondering how we make sure that, is it my Blackness? Is it my LGBTQ status? You know, if I'm there for something that has nothing to do with what's below the waist, and somebody's going to disrespect your child and misgender, or, you know, or need to take a peek for, you know, reasons that have just jack shit to do with why you're there. So I'm just wondering, how do we have those, make sure that those things, you know, don't happen to other people? How do we share those lessons learned?
I think what Shawn said is spot on. Like, sharing that script, you know, being able, like, what I feel like I really do in public health is that I'm a translator. I can translate the high information or the advanced science and treatment information to my community. I can speak it in their language. I can get them to go in the doctor and say the things that they need to say to be able to get what they need to get. But I think you have to be able to understand the intersections, right? Like you got to speak the language of the person who you're speaking to. And it's the same thing with people who are multilingual. It's like you have to be able to speak to people and get them to understand what it is that you need. Oftentimes I'll tell people, like, I don't like needles. And so I've gotten an STD or two in my lifetime, but I tell the doctor all the time, I don't like needles. I've lied and said I'm allergic to penicillin so that I don't have to get a penicillin shot. I can say, I don't want intramuscular treatment. I want an oral dosage. When you start to say stuff like that, the doctor automatically is like, oh shit, this person knows what they're talking about. I'm not gonna mess with him. And it's the same thing. I tell my kids that all the time. If you don't think that you can say that, bring somebody with you who can. Bring somebody with you who can advocate for you, who is going to speak up and make sure that your needs are met. Because the doctors, like, a lot of the times, they don't get it. They've got a whole lot of stuff going on. And sometimes it's not even that they really don't care. It's that they don't know. And that's scary. It's like very, very scary. Another thing that I think about in all of this is, like, oftentimes as Black LGBTQ plus folks, we don't really engage in medical care. And those opportunities where we do, right, where we're trying to have confirmation surgeries, or where we're trying to be on PrEP, or where we're trying to be on antiretroviral therapy. Those are opportunities to, as a doctor, that's an opportunity for you to keep these people engaged in the medical system. And so for me, I'm like, you're the doctor, you want to have a ton of accolades behind your name. You should be trying to keep these people in these, engaged in these services, so that you can look better, and so that your physician, or not your physician, but so that your facility can look better. And so I think, again, the script is where you have to start. Just make sure that you get folks to be able to speak the languages that that the provider speaks, and vice versa. If you're talking to folks in community, make sure that you're speaking to them. You're not saying seroconverted. Like, you don't have to say all of those things, let them know what seroconversion is. But again, just being able to tell them, when you go in there, this is what you got to ask for. These are the hot topics. These are the keywords to drop in the conversation, and go from there. But once you start to say the right things, doctors' ears perk up and they start to listen and pay attention.
And can I add something to that before you move on, Duran? I just want to bring in the piece of the conversation about, we have a healthcare workforce that in their training in med school, they are not required to learn about the healthcare needs and unique healthcare needs of this community, of these communities, LGBTQ plus us. They don't have to learn about that. They can take an elective, but there's no mandated curriculum provided in their instruction throughout. And so people are going to bring who they are. And that's one of the things, when we go back to the first question you asked us about, where does this distrust come from? Distrust come from, I know how this world works. I am very aware that people are going to bring their whole selves to their work. I've had people walk in on me in an exam room, a provider, a white woman walk in on me, and I was, gender nonconforming, because I was always who I was. So I was very masculine presenting before I transitioned. And she just stood at the doorway. I was scared too, because she wouldn't come in the room. And I was like, well, what kind of provider won't even come in? And she stood at the door and literally had her foot cracked. So to your other point, was it because I was Black or because I was gender nonconforming? I don't know. It's probably a combination of both. But we need to talk about, how are we going to get this medical workforce up to speed? Because that's what first you need to know about LGBT folks. You need to know that, like, for example, my provider I remember when I was going for a consult for another procedure, and she gave me my medical record. And in that record, I've been working with this woman. She had took me through my top surgery, my early transition. I loved her. She was a great provider. She wrote in there that I was a homosexual, that I only engaged in homosexual sex, with other women. She still classified me as a lesbian,
Mm.
and that I had never had sex with a man. How she knew this, I don't know, because we never had that conversation, right? She'd never asked me about that. So, and I took it back to her, you know, because I'm telling you, I'm the advocate. So the answer to your question is no. I know what your question was going to be. Is there ever a time I didn't respond? No. I don't care how I was feeling. No, I'm going to tell you who I am and demand that I get the care that I deserve. So she was open to that. We talked about it. She explained to me that it was in my permanent record, but she could put an addendum, because I made sure she put an addendum into that medical record that stipulated that I was a trans man, identified as male, man, masculine, and that I was not a homosexual, that I was queer. I use queer. So anyway, that's what I did.
Shawn, that was a lot. And I'm glad
it's a lot being Black and trans, Duran. It's a lot.
Yes. No. I'm saying it's a lot in the sense that I so appreciate your story, and I so appreciate the fact of having that conversation with that particular nurse that had been, you know, there throughout your journey. And the fact of something going into your permanent record based upon somebody else's interpretation of something. I'm just wondering, you know, how many times that has happened to us? Because who's I've never seen, you know, what the file is when I go to my doctor's office to say, you know, these are all the things that, you know, how they classify me. And I'm just wondering too, when you said that there's no mandate in medical school for learning physicians to have to learn LGBTQ plus communities and things that adversely possibly impact their delivery of healthcare. That was really, that's kind of, it's shocking, and it's sad, because I think about, you know, how does that actually then translate into the real world as far as when we have, you know, our LGBTQ community going into these healthcare systems. And once again, it sounds like then we are the ones who are educating. You know, we are the ones.
And then that's why we want to leave.
Right.
That's why we want to leave. We have to sit here and educate you, and I'm coming here to get some help. Like, I don't want to be here. Give me that pill, and I'm out. Yeah, like, they talk to you crazy. They misgender you. They keep misgendering you. Then there's a lack of accountability. And then it's like, oh, well, I didn't know. It's like, girl, I don't got time for this. I can get my moms in San Francisco.
There you go.
And you know, and just kind of a side note, I used to work for the health department, the Alameda County Public Health Department, and I knew that a lot of trans women would go from the East Bay side to the San Francisco side for services, you know, and vice versa, depending upon what the specific thing was that was needed. But I always remember it was because the services for this particular thing or this particular organization, this particular healthcare provider are better for this than on this side than that side. And it always kind of, you know, felt really, you know, bad in the sense of having to, you know, decipher and figure out when I need where there is a need, where is the best place to go for that need to be fulfilled? I don't know, Janelle, if you had that experience or any of your trans sisters had that experience.
Yeah, I think it was, you know, at one time it was easier to go to San Francisco because at least San Francisco was hiring the girls. I can go into a clinic and see one of the girls. And I'm from Oakland. So over here, I wasn't seeing the girls over here. I would see the butch queens. And they'll try it too. They'll be the first ones to tell your tea and get the girls in there to start talking. And so it would seem easier to go to San Francisco at times because it was something more relatable. You would see yourself when you walk in the door. But then past that, there could still be a different experience. And so it seems like, you know, some of the girls I know prefer going to San Francisco because seeing the girls and feeling like, oh, okay, the doctors are a little bit more up on their game. I'm not going to be misgendered. Because once I'm misgendered at a clinic, that's the downfall for me. It's a done deal. Like, how am I walking up in here looking like all of this and you're saying he or sir?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, yeah, I can see that. But then, you know, there are still situations where the surgeons and stuff now are still doing or telling you what it is that they feel like you need or that you deserve, and not listening to how I see my transition. You're not even trans, like you're performing the surgery. And so sometimes the doctors or the staff like discredit your transness based on what they feel like it should be. So it's always still hard.
You said something that kind of makes me kind of think about what Shawn said. And you said in the sense of the physicians telling you what you deserve. Is that in the sense of what you deserve as far as things or procedures to do your confirmation surgery? Because I'm just thinking, like, how do they make those decisions? It sounds like those decisions are being made, you know, on your behalf, but not with you. And I would imagine that would cause great distrust or medical mistrust.
Yeah.
If someone is,
I think there's this thing with Kaiser. There's this thing with Kaiser where Kaiser is going to do, they'll do your affirming surgery, but they have a hard stop, right? So a couple of my sisters, we all had the same surgeon. They're going to shave your bones down and all that, and that's it. Anything after that is considered cosmetic, and they want you to pay out of pocket. But then I have my other sisters who ain't working and go to San Francisco. They taking fat from their stomach, putting it in their cheeks. They're doing 360 lipo, all of these different things where it's like, so is she more trans than me? Like, what makes her more deserving of these things? And I have to jump through hella hoops at Kaiser to the point where it's like, I'm not going to jump through all these hoops. I can pay to get my body done. Like, but if you're telling me that my insurance can pay for it, why is there all of these things? Why are there these barriers keeping me from getting it? Why is the surgeon telling me that, oh no, your breast size can't be that? That's not something that you need. And so to me, it feels like you're telling me what I deserve. And if I feel like I need more than that, then I need to pay out of pocket.
So then, Janelle, and I'm sorry, Shawn, if I didn't mean to cut you off, but in that respect, and it sounds like, once again, you're advocating for yourself in making sure that the way in which you want things to go, being able to make sure that you set those things up in motion, even if it means it's outside of what Kaiser does, if it's within your medical insurance or paying for yourself out of pocket. And also the understanding that, you know, others are able to go into San Francisco and have procedures that are done that may be covered under whatever system that supports their transition. Damn.
Yeah, that's because Kaiser is a for-profit medical establishment. They're about their money. They're doing trans surgeries because they're getting paid to do them now. And I get that. But to Janelle's point about body appraisal from medical providers, I've heard many stories about that, where a provider will look at you and say, no, well, you don't need to get your facial feminization, which is a procedure that many of my sisters get or want to get. You know, they want to get that, and tell them what they can't have or can't do, or, you know, it's weird. Like I had a therapist tell me that, you know, you really don't need to go on hormones. I don't want you to go on hormones. You could get a top surgery. Your voice is already deep. You're very masculine. And I loved her for all the other dark places she had brought me through. Like we did some work together. And that was the therapist I transitioned with, but I had to quit seeing her because you want to tell me what my trans experience is going to be. And there's no one trans experience. You could have 20 trans people on this panel, and we're all going to have a unique story to how we came to our name, what procedures we want or didn't want, or what our sexual orientations are. Because oftentimes people feel like, well, they put us in this box of binary. Our sexual expression and experience is expansive as anybody else. We doing all the things, everything.
and having fun.
Did I kill my sister over there? I killed her.
I think you knocked her off of her seat on that.
I didn't mean to kill you, Janelle.
So sorry.
So I'm hearing a lot of ways within, you know, our own personal stories, folks that we work with. So where do you think that that medical mistrust, you know, really comes from? We talked about the intersectionality of being Black. We talked about, you know, that and the LGBTQ community. But where do you think is it? If it's Black, where does it come from? Go ahead.
I don't know the number. I don't know the exact number, but I know half of the country voted for Biden and the other half voted for Trump. So where it comes from, it's home. It's coming from people's parents. It's learned behavior. You know, I was gonna bring this up in the previous conversation, but I'm like, we live in a bubble called California.
Okay.
And we happen to like live in a really progressive part of California, fortunately. But just think about all the other people in middle of America, in the South. You know, this is not rocket science. People are racist, and it's just as real as you can be. Like systematic racism, systematic oppression, disenfranchisement, all of this stuff they're systems. And so they start from birth. You know, people know at 2 or 3, like I remember I was telling my little cousin that she was Black. She was about 2 or 3. She started bawling. She was like, I'm not Black. And I'm like, you are Black. She's like, I'm tan. I'm like, you're right. You are tan. You're absolutely right. But it's just sad that that was my fault, right? Telling her that she was Black and all of that stuff. But I'm like, that's what society tells us. And that's what we've been conditioned to do. That's what we've been taught to do. You know, hearing what, I can't remember the doctor who presented our first yesterday, but that study around, that study around biases, medical provider biases, where they believe that Black people have thicker skin so we can take more pain. Needles don't hurt us the same. I'm like, where does that come from? I'm definitely afraid of needles. I don't even want one in the room. And to say that like somehow I'm going to be less impacted or less hurt by a needle or by pain, it's like, it's crazy. We're human beings just like everyone else. We bleed the same. We have the same pains, the same aches and everything. But this stuff starts at home. It's taught. It's reinforced. And it just is what it is. It's reinforced in schools. It's reinforced in homes. It's reinforced on TV. And so, yeah, it's the way that America is.
I'm going to take it back even further than my brother just brought it to you, because you're absolutely right. I'm going to take it back to pre-contact, and we're going to talk about colonization and how the white supremacy came here in the first place. When these people, when the colonizers reached indigenous people, they were living, thriving. They had all the genders, all the expressions. They came in and pathologized that in the name of patriarchy, white supremacy, and conquering people and stealing their lands and peoples. That's where that comes from. Because if you do your research and you read anthropological studies, right, when they have encountered different people like the Peloponnesian people or African people or any other indigenous groups that they came across, those people, they were not binary. Right? They had other people, because we didn't just pop up and say, you know, I'm going to be trans. I think that's a good thing to do today. I'm going to be a gay man or a lesbian or a non-binary. We didn't just pop up. We're just who we are. All I know is I'm me. And I know that coming out as trans for me personally was the most liberating thing. Many of the other troubles that I was experiencing could come right back to that I wasn't able to live as my authentic self. So I mean, I try to live my life openly Black, openly trans, and unapologetic about it. I mean, that's just what it is, because, you know, white supremacy is going to be there until white people decide to change it. I'm tired of trying to change white supremacy because I don't have no power in that. White people don't have to change that, right? I have to learn how to live with it and not and be as joyous as I can the majority of the time for my own health and well-being. But we have to really call it what it is. It is that learned stuff that you get in home, community, church, but also take it back historically to where it came from, who created what we learn, right? Who created the educational system, what you're going to actually learn in your classes and course of study? That's real. We're being programmed at that point. So if you're not taking time out to re-educate yourself and or your children, and I feel for the baby, the cousin, I've had a similar experience with one of my mixed relatives, and I told them, but you're Black. No, I'm not. I am not. And I got, because it was a baby, it was a kid. I got why they were saying that, until, you fill them up with the richness of being Black and try to get them empowered with their Blackness, that Black is beautiful, and get them to love being Black.
And, I love what you both just said as far as, George, when you were talking about it starts at home, and Shawn, when you took it back even further historically. And I'm wondering, how do we now, given what we know, given what we experience, what would you like to see change in order to address medical mistrust in the LGBTQ community? What would we need to see happen to change that distrust? If it's in the home, if there's a great historical concept, and if it's also the reality of different supremacies when we go into these medical facilities and they're telling us and dictating to us how our medical procedure, how our medical care is supposed to look like. So what would
I think the first step is language, and I always go to this when I talk about this subject. Even the terms of mistrust and distrust, that's not how I frame it. There's been a history of medical abuse against LGBT people and Black people that I know about from my Black queer experience. And so that's the first point, is to call it what it is. It's been a history of abuse. Where's the accountability in that? How are you going to change something if you haven't atoned for it, right? First, you have to admit that you've abused us. And when you go back and you read the history of medical abuse on enslaved Africans in this country, from the time they pulled them from the motherland and got them on the ship, it was a medical issue. It was about get them healthy Black bodies over to where we need them to be to create this wealth for these countries, being the Britain, the Americas, and so on and so forth. So that, for me, is the first start. And then we go into what we all know is, people need to be educated. We need to be trained. The medical workforce needs cultural humility trainings. They need them ongoing. They need to not come to this symposium at this one point in time, but they have to have a training plan. They have to have ways that they're hiring, they're onboarding of staff, vetting of people to make sure if you're serving a queer population, are your staff able to do that? Do they understand what they've signed up for? Maybe they have a bias that they learned in that home of origin, as George talked about, right? Okay, that's cool. But when you come to work, we serve trans people. We serve gay men. We serve Black people. How are you going to do your job with those beliefs? And some people can. They can come in and get their job done, but other people cannot. And they bring those biases and prejudices and discrimination into the workplace.
I like what you said.
I echo everything. Go ahead.
You echo what
Shawn
Shawn
said, yeah.
Was there anything additional that you would add?
I think it's a person at a time. Like going to these clinics, you can have people who are cool and know how to talk to you, but I definitely think that it's one person at a time, because I've had doctors who've been really cool and had cultural competency and know how to talk to me, and then I can go to one of their colleagues and they don't. And so I definitely think that it takes one person at a time. We can build up these infrastructures and make sure that the organizations have all of these policies, but are the people working there following the policies? Right. Are the people there transphobic or homophobic? So I think it definitely starts with a person at a time too.
What about you, George?
I agree with both Shawn and Janelle. I believe that we have to somehow get in here and provide capacity building for the whole medical workforce. I saw a study that was done, I think in like 2012 2014, but it was around the HIV workforce, specifically the Black HIV workforce. And it was showing how like 80% of agencies were underdeveloped and undertrained. And I think that it's the same thing with doctors. Like, we forget that they spend a lot of time in school. And so while we're busy living life and gaining knowledge and experience from lived experience, they're sitting in a classroom with their head buried in a book and are oblivious to a lot of the things that are going on. And so I think when they come out of school, they're eager to work and all of those things, but they're not cognizant oftentimes of what their actions, what kind of an impact their actions have on individuals. And I do think that it can be done in groups, but it definitely needs to be the whole facility if you're going to do it in a group. Because again, like Shawn said, there has to be some kind of process, a vetting process, some kind of onboarding where you say, this is who we work with. And, I ask those questions. I've learned recently hiring people, like, you've got to ask those questions. I had an employee who had worked here for about 6 years collectively. And he and a person of trans experience got into a fight, or not a real fight, but an argument. And he was like, I wasn't going to beat her up. And I'm like, a trans man, sorry, caveat. But he was like, I wasn't going to beat him up because I wouldn't beat up no girl. And it's like, what have you been listening to? And how have you been around us for this long? And something like that could come out of your mouth. And so I think that, no matter how often you're exposed to it, you still can't necessarily know that someone is that person until they show their hand. And so, yeah, we can do individual level work and stuff like that, but it starts with person. They have to actually want to do these things, and they have to actually care about it.
Yeah. And I want to thank you. And I want to circle back to something that you said, Shawn, that really resonated with me when you said kind of the confusion, not the confusion, but the terminology of medical mistrust and distrust. And you use medical abuse, and you call it out as medical abuse. And the thing that I so appreciate about you saying that is, for me, that was an aha moment for me. One of the things that I think with medical mistrust and distrust, it seems kind of like internal, something that I feel and experience that I've had. Medical abuse feels like it puts it on the shoulders of the abusers. This is what you're doing, what you have learned. These are those things that you do that are violating, that are violent to the ways in which I exist and the ways in which I access or don't access care, the reasons why I am fearful of engaging in medical services that could benefit my health, and making then the onus on the abuser to be educated to address you almost made me cuss, the way in which they show up. And I think that's and like I said, that stood out for me, because it's like, yeah, it's like, I think oftentimes in what we do, even when we talked about it, making ourselves having to fit in a way, either making sure that those conversations have with each other. Shawn, you shared the fact of, folks telling you what you had to say to be able to get services. But that is, so the abuser is positioned to facilitate the thing that we want, as opposed to being able to go into those situations and having that kind of conversation to say, this is how I see my authentic self. This is the way that I see healthcare happening for me. And this is the way in which I want to engage with you in it. I hope we didn't lose.
You have a question?
Yeah. We engage with the medical. And so I'm just kind of wondering, for others, how does that resonate with you? Because like I say, it was an aha moment for me. I don't know if it was an aha moment for you, but I'm still going to let that kind of marinate within my soul. So when I hear folks talk about their experience with medical mistrust, and to say you have just experienced a medical system of abuse. So
particularly when you think about COVID and these vaccines, because we haven't talked about COVID and
that's a question.
Oh,
go
is
ahead,
it?
go ahead.
Oh.
No, it's good. It's a good segment.
Oh.
Go.
No, because when we're talking about this thing about who's not taking COVID vaccines and who is, there's layers to it. There's like access to information, ability to interpret data and research science, so you can do your own background check on the vaccine, see if you feel comfortable taking it. But to me, it's like people want to demonize those people who have experienced historical medical abuse, right? About why they aren't going to take a vaccine, right? To me, it makes sense. It's just like, wow, how can I talk to you more? Can I give you more information? Can I share this with you to maybe bring you along, as a Black person? Because we know, just like it's important to see trans people or other queer people, gay people, when you go to get services, it's important to see Black people. We learned that a long time ago in HIV, and we still can't seem to get rid of disparities, but that's another panel, right? But the point is, with COVID, it's like that makes sense that that's like a protective, right? Because you've experienced abuse. Like, why am I going to let you shoot me up with this vaccine that you made in a year? I get it. But when you go do your research, you can find out more. And I think that's something that I just wanted to throw into this conversation. Maybe there's more people that have other things to say about that. But that's because I was one of those people at first, especially under that last administration. I was like, child, I'm just stay in this room. I've been in this room for all these months. I'm not coming out. And so I'm not taking a vaccine with you. But, then you come along.
Things change. I was going to say, I think I definitely had an aha moment. It wasn't until you expanded a little bit on it, Duran, but I think just that word mistrust and distrust, it's like, this is appropriate responses given the circumstances and given the history of what we have went through as it relates to medical care in this country. So I don't think we should even call it medical mistrust or distrust. It's like the appropriate response to how we have been handled in this country as it relates to medical care. So yeah, I think that abuse is a much more appropriate word, and it's definitely fitting. When you say mistrust and distrust, that almost kind of puts the blame on the person for not trusting, right? It's like, what? I don't trust you because of all of these reasons. Like, wouldn't you not trust you?
Right.
I mean, I'd be a fool if I had 100% trust in the medical system as a Black gay man. And so, yeah, I think just calling it what it is very powerful.
And it makes it perfect. It makes it sound purposeful. It's purposeful, as opposed to, something that you just kind of fall into and it's, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, no, it was purposeful.
Yeah, it feels like abuse. So I think abuse definitely is the right word.
And Shawn, you kind of backed into it a little bit around COVID. So I want to go there as far as COVID. So how has COVID, do you think, impacted the way the LGBTQ community seeks the vaccine, or even getting tested to even know if you have COVID present in your body? Do you think that what do you think the mistrust is around COVID? And Shawn, touched on it.
So yeah, all of the things that Shawn said, the fact, that there's a lack of access to information, a lack of access to resources, a lack of the ability to interpret data, to interpret science. That's all intentional and structural. But also too, the gay community, well, the LGBTQ plus community as a whole, we've all kind of had to adopt our own families and our own systems of kinship and different things like that. So when you go approach a community that already is stacked on top of each other, because only one of us has a place to stay, and it's 9 of us in this place, like, how can we truly practice social distancing? And then if we can only convene with one another from our own community, how do we like deal with social isolation? And so, yeah, I just think that all of the different structural pieces to COVID exacerbate the outcomes are the mistrust around COVID. You know, I've been fortunate enough to have not been vaccinated and also have not contracted COVID. But I've gone a couple of places. Like I went to Atlanta, I went to Miami, and just to see how people in other places, right? Like we respond very appropriately, I think, in California, but in other parts of the country, they were like balls to the walls. It was wide open, like clubs, restaurants, everything, you know. I remember I was getting ready to go inside of an establishment, was like, oh my God, I forgot my mask. And the security guard was like, you don't have to wear a mask. I was thinking, so no one in here cares about one another, right? Like we don't even care about ourselves enough to say, let's not go in there or let's not be a contributor to the problem. And so I think just not understanding how our communities operate and how we function is just another thing to stack on top of all of the syndemics that happen to us. HIV, you know, mass incarceration, all of those things. And so, yeah, it is another layer to our rationale for why we don't engage with medical systems.
Yeah, I definitely think it's definitely the lack of trust and the lack of information from the people that are around me, who it's like now people are like, okay, I believe that COVID is a thing because some people that we know have been affected, but do I really want a vaccine? Like, are they going to put a chip in my arm? Like not having the information. And then also not even being able to go to your doctor to get it. I've been lucky to get it, but had to go to a high school and they don't want me to take a picture. I'm like, oh, I want to show my friends. So if I die, no cameras, none of this. And it's like, do I want to be doing this? Y'all haven't had this out long enough. The president was up there acting stupid. It's trickling down. And so it's like, how can I take this serious if nobody else is really taking it serious? And now y'all want me to get a shot twice. It's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And I'm wondering too, what you all think about, because when we talk about COVID and getting the shot and lack of information or lack of access to information, I'm wondering if that is, and I'm going to use mistrust in the sense of our own mistrust in not seeking that information, in equating like COVID and the COVID vaccination to like PrEP, and the COVID vaccination to folks who are on ART, the antiretroviral medication. We know that PrEP prevents someone from acquiring HIV. We know that when folks are on their HIV medications, that the virus can become in most people undetectable, and when it is undetectable, folks cannot transmit HIV through sex, right? We know this. And I'm wondering if this is another one of those things with COVID and the vaccine, if we are, you know, not purposefully, if we're waiting for the empty train so we can get on, and there are 20 trains going, I'm using an analogy, if 20 BART trains are going, and we have to be at work in 10 minutes, and we're just waiting for that last train that we see that everybody else has got on and has made it. I'm just wondering, are we purposely waiting for something some kind of
I think with HIV and PrEP, like, so with the HIV and knowing that you can have treatment as prevention, that's something that we have seen. We know that to be true. We know that PrEP is something that can keep you from getting HIV. We've seen that, and now people are championing for that. You can't walk up and down the street without seeing a PrEP sign. You see George and all of them on these bus stops championing for it, right? COVID hasn't been around long enough for us to believe that this vaccine is going to keep me from getting it. And then they're like, oh, well, it's not 100%. And so it's like, yeah, I'm going to wait till all these trains pass. If the train blow up, I know not to get on it, but I'm not going to hop on the first one. I feel like that's how it is in my Black community. Like, I'm not going to be the first one to hop on taking this shot. Like, yeah, I can go get a COVID test, but even in getting the COVID test, they all do it differently. When I went to CVS, it seemed like they were tickling my brain. But when I go to Asian Health Services, when I go to all these places, it doesn't even seem like they're deep in my nose like that. And so it hasn't been around long enough. I haven't seen it enough. I haven't seen enough people with the vaccine to know that this is something that is real.
Okay. Does it go back to what Shawn said? Like, how you gonna create a vaccine within a year?
Yeah, they was giving Black people syphilis. Like, what's that? Like, ain't nobody trying to do that.
Well, they weren't treating the Black people.
Yeah.
See, that's the difference. And this is the thing. They weren't treating people who had syphilis to see what the syphilis was going to do. That was a U.S. Public Health Service syphilis experiment at Tuskegee. That's what happened. And you note that I don't call it the Tuskegee experiment again because the language is powerful. That was the United States government that did that study.
Amen.
To be clear on that. But it's like all the things you said, Janelle, are so true. You hurried. This stuff came through. It came through under the white supremacists in chief, to quote my favorite congresswoman right now, Cori Bush out of Ferguson, Missouri, who called the former president the white supremacist in chief. It came through under him. He tried to rush it. He tried to bully the FDA to make it approved for emergency use before they were ready exactly to do that. So all of those things, again, are valid. It is a protective to say, I'm not taking it. However, I think what's needed for communities that have experienced these abuses is an education campaign. It is to have ambassadors that look like them, that have the shared lived experiences as they have out there taking it. But for me personally, as a fully vaccinated person and was grateful to get both of my shots, they're giving that to healthy, white, rich men. They are taking this vaccine. I was like, girl, I'm getting me a vaccine. And we ain't gonna forget that Dr. Kizzy helped to produce the vaccine, right? I think she was on the Moderna team. But that's the whole point, is doing the research and learning what it is, learning what the vaccine is. Now, we still aren't going to know, because to me, even though they've made advancements in vaccine production and all those reasons that helped it speed itself along, and they poured money into it like they're not pouring into maybe other health concerns, because this is affecting capitalism. Point blank range, that's my perspective. It is stopping the money train. We have not experienced the full economic impact of COVID yet. We have not experienced that. It's coming though, right? So it's about these people in power that 1% their money. You can't go to work, they can't make no money. So they're gonna hurry up and pour all those funds into that, and it's killing millions of people. So when I take all of that into consideration, but again, I have a privilege of education. I have the privilege of being able to interpret data, right? I have the privilege of working with infectious disease scientists and researchers that I know personally, that I can say, hey, but I have this question about it, right? I talk to my sister till I'm blue in the face. She's 66 years old. She has comorbidities. She needs the vaccine, and she keeps telling me, I'm going to get it. They've offered it to her twice. I'm going to get it. I can't even tell her no more. I just pray, please go get the vaccine, because I don't want you to get it. I don't want you to get COVID. So I just think it's so complicated.
It is.
And I just want to add, like, I think all of that is right, like messaging, everything, but also calling out inconsistencies. Like, I get why it got approved in a year, right? Like, all you got to do is watch Act Up. Like, I think, having those conversations with people and letting them know, like, there's a reason why some stuff can be pushed through FDA regulations and stuff faster. And it's because of HIV. And it's because of white, cisgendered people acting up about their community. And the same thing, like Shawn said, if you seeing the rich and the poor getting any kind of thing, trust me, the government is not experimenting on you. They wouldn't even try to experiment on you with STDs and stuff like that because they know everybody has sex with everybody. These are things that they figured out a long time ago. And so being able to call out the reasons that, you know, their story is inconsistent with that. And then also recognizing that their ambivalence is rightfully placed. Like, that's not something to disregard, but I also got to tell you how stupid it is for you to say X, Y, Z. And having those real honest conversations with people is how you do it. But again, as someone who has not received the vaccine, I can use PrEP for a prime example. Like Janelle said, I've been on PrEP for almost 10 years now. But that said, when I got on PrEP, I was hesitant to get on PrEP. It was just that I knew that Truvada had been used for 20 plus years before that, and it hadn't killed nobody, and people were fine. In fact, they were healthier than they were before the first round of medicines. So I knew, you know, I had enough research, I had enough knowledge to make an informed decision. And so I think giving people the knowledge and the information and allowing them to make their own decision is where you start. But you also have to be brave enough to call people out for some of the foolish things that they say. You know, like the government did not create HIV to kill off gay people because they know that gay men have sex with heterosexual men and heterosexual men have sex with women. And, you know, that's just not how we have population control. And they also know that Black men are going to have sex with white men. And so it's just like, you know, you got to call those things out when you have the opportunity.
And, you know, and I appreciate some kind of consistent themes that I hear from you all. One is like education and the knowledge and sharing that. And also calling it out in the moment and calling it out to provide the opportunity for change. Because I think that that is the only way that we are going to begin to plant those seeds of change. And it might not grow fruit tomorrow, next week, but I think that you have to plant those seeds so eventually something's going to germinate, something's going to be that fruit that people can eat from and say, you know what, I hear you. I understand my portion of making or serving as an agent of medical mistrust or my adding to medical abuse. And one of the things that I want to do now is we've had this great conversation, flowing conversation, and I want to take the opportunity, if you all are willing, just to kind of open it up to folks who are in our session to see if they have any questions for you all. You can either, you know, type something in chat and or just unmic and let us hear your thoughts.